Hey everyone, thanks for joining our session. We're doing a Q&A on how people analytics teams are supporting their organizations initially through the transition to remote work and also thinking about the future of remote work. I'm very honored today to be joined by Min Park, who is the VP of People Insights and Analytics at VideoAmp, and Alex Yazdi, who is on the people analytics team at Dropbox. Dropbox, interestingly, has recently made public that they are going virtual first. He has a lot of interesting insights and things to say about that. I'd love to kick off the session. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I'm actually, by the way, the founder of Worklytics. We're a people analytics company focused on collaboration data. So I'd love to kick off the session by just asking both of you to give a quick overview of what your roles are in your respective organizations in people analytics, what you're focused on at a high level. Min, why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure, thanks. So hi everyone, thanks for joining. I lead people analytics at VideoAmp. VideoAmp, if you're not familiar with us, we're a measurement company in the TV advertising space. So we're doing people analytics for an analytics company, which is always fun. Our functional mission in people insights and analytics at VideoAmp is really to apply theory and analytics and insight to measure what matters and inspire actions, not just across our leaders, but also across all of our people. And ultimately, as a later stage startup, our vision is to become a legend at scaling our organizational culture and climate as a way of driving revenue as well as transforming the industry beyond our wildest imaginations if we can. And it's really about doing it through our people and the way we work. And so as an analytics company, as a company that puts its people first, it makes sense to, even though we are a smaller company, to have someone like me in place to lead the kind of work that we do.
Awesome. That's awesome, man. Well, my name is Alex. Yeah. So thank you so much, Philip, for bringing me here. Dropbox, for those of you who don't know, primarily before kind of a couple last year and the time before that, we were mostly an online storage company, in terms of space and things like that. However, we've kind of morphed and shifted in towards this kind of work spaces and an ability to really aggregate all of your work in one area so that you can come in there and you're not littered with a bunch of these distractions. My specific role at Dropbox is a senior people data analyst, and I work primarily on development and enhancements of our Tableau dashboard suites for the HR and the recruiting team. And as well as I work cross-functionally with some of our ITS teams to integrate new data sources and surface new logic into our data warehouse in Snowflake. And just want to give a quick shout out to the people analytics team at Dropbox who's watching this right now. Super excited to tackle 2021 together, this virtual first and future of work together. So thanks, Philip.
Awesome, yeah, great. So we've obviously gone through, in all of our organizations, a huge amount of change. I know, Min, you talked about that earlier in your presentation, but as we move to work from home and kind of supporting the workforce, and people analytics teams have been called in to help provide data and insight to support the workforce, support decisions that are being made. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about some of the types of work that you're doing in your organizations to support that. Maybe you could start with that, Alex.
Yeah, definitely. So at a high level, we specifically two things come to mind for me. One, we worked with on an O&A pilot with yours truly, Worklytics, to kind of help decipher some work from home trends. The second was that we needed to add some new topics and kind of pivot our employee engagement surveys about how we track the pandemic and work from home responses over time better. So let me kind of dive into that first O&A pilot that we did together. We saw that certain Dropboxer behavior patterns were healthy and unhealthy at the same time. We saw that people engaged and were interacting more frequently with their peers and their leads, and we believe that this tended to be a protective factor for engagement and retention. In general, also we saw an increased virtual collaboration with the move to mandatory work from home, which we interpreted as a positive signal, meaning people were more kind of making up for that lack of in-person interaction. And then also at a high level, we saw different metrics that provided insights of the strengths and weaknesses of the work from home experience. We looked at the impact of remote work on recurring meetings, uninterrupted work blocks that people can focus on, the extent to which employees collaborated across their own team and cross-functionally. And all of these things that we saw really led us for useful information for informing our virtual first strategy that we're currently rolling out, toolkits and trainings that we're providing for our employees as we shift to this longer term goal. So at the end of the day, the O&A pilot allowed us to encourage engagement during our work from home period while continuing to advocate for that work-life balance. That's so important, as we all see with this remote work. And let me touch on quickly about the employee engagement surveys that I talked about earlier. A quick shout out to our in-house survey expert, Kaylee Starkey-Zimmerman, as well as Caitlin Byrne on our team who do a lot of this work or have done in the past. We looked at different topics that were important for us as we moved to this kind of shift. We saw that, how is your relationship with your manager trending over time? How do you feel supported and connected with your coworkers? And so as a direct result of some of these results level, it influenced how we thought about our future of work strategy and really about thinking, how do we re-engineer our employee and supporting our employee well-being? So we surfaced some of these findings to our HR leadership team as well as staff, which in turn led Dropbox to implement company-wide initiatives. And I'll talk about 3 at a quick high level. First, we found out that actually Dropboxers were having a tough time taking time off. They were like, well, we're at home anyways. If I turn off my monitor, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? So therefore, we kind of thought about this at a high level, and we implemented a company PTO day once a month to allow employees to kind of recharge, come back excited for work. 2, we provided access to mental health through Modern Health for every employee. And 3, we saw that there was a specific niche to really implement parental support programs during this pandemic to let parents know that they're not alone. So I feel like those 2 things we've really tried to surface to our leadership to then impact our organization and Dropbox as a whole.
Awesome. That's really interesting. What you said about people not thinking about taking PTO because they're home anyway, and you having to force that. That's a great insight. Min, how about you guys at VideoAmp?
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone who's on the prior session, I showed a video of how strong our in-person culture was prior to the pandemic, and in literally a blink of an eye, we lost that. And it's a temporary loss, but it is prolonged, and we can hear from our employees pretty quickly. A lot of the host of issues, Alex, that you mentioned, including mental health, but just like this loss of culture and not understanding, where do I go? Like our culture was almost synonymous with being in person. And so I think people lost the ability to know exactly what are the appropriate behaviors now in terms of what are the norms, what are the new norms, and how do we seek these out? And we would see in the signals from all the data that we were pouring through that stress and mental health was an issue. We did also implement Modern Health, but we saw that the uptake rate on that was very low. I think, people were too stressed to even know how to prioritize time for that. And so, we ran a climate and culture survey to figure out, hey, what's going on? What's at the root of what drives employee engagement? And what are the blockers to those drivers? What's the deeper thing? What's the deeper thing that's going on, the root cause? And what we found was that people were having to kind of rebuild and reimagine what it is like to kind of recreate that culture that we had, what made us great, because it wasn't the physical environment. It was actually the collection of the weaker links and the weaker ties and the relationships that we all take for granted. The people you run into at the water cooler or the kitchen, or even the people that you interact with at work at the local Starbucks or the coffee shop or the lunch spot. That kind of interaction, we were realizing provided so much social support and just, really the energy that helps us stay motivated and engaged and energized. And so it wasn't trying to replicate something that we lost. We realized that we had to double down on building integrity and creating trust around our values as the backbone to our culture. And so not only in our people systems, whether it's our talent management, compensation, performance systems, are we building structure around it to make sure that we are rewarding what we say we value. It's also arming and sharing all of these insights with our employees very openly and transparently, and telling them, hey, you're responsible, empowered adults. Here's some ideas for what you can do to help everyone hold each other accountable on living the values as we say we will. And by the way, that bled into the meeting culture. We also saw that people were having an excess of meetings and they were wasteful, and it was actually creating more stress. And we realized it's not just the meeting etiquette. There was the more systemic issue around the lack of, I don't know what the right behaviors are. So I'm actually nervous about this meeting. And so I'm going to have another meeting before the meeting to prepare for the meeting instead of actually just getting in a room and talking about the issue. And so we realized we had to attack it from multiple angles, whereas yes, we are doing all the, let's provide the resources around how to have better meetings and make them suck less, but also how do we create a system and a culture in a virtual environment that honors who we are and where people can know exactly how to behave and be themselves at work.
Awesome, thanks. Very, very insightful, Min. We've talked a lot about organizational network analysis, and it's obviously a space that we're in. We're often talking to our customers about using techniques like O&A and other alternative data sources to understand what the current situation is in organizations and to help plan for whether it's moving fully remote or hybrid or somewhere in between. Can you talk briefly about how you're thinking about using some of these techniques, or how you have, and what you think has worked well, and what the opportunities are for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like as a person in the field right now, it's like being a kid in a candy store. It's how do you choose what to do? It's actually overwhelming. I say data science is it's like cooking, right? There's so many different types of cuisines. There's so many different scales that we can do it. So what do you pick? And I think, as students of analytics and data science, we are often taught the methods and we're often shown the data sources. And I actually wonder if that's not the most productive way to go about asking the questions. It's what's the issue at hand? Where do we think the root causes are? And actually the most helpful thing for me has been getting a little academic and nerdy and learning about theory. Because as new as our field is, IO psychology and economics and labor economics has been around for quite a long time. And so there's actually, if you're willing to pop open a textbook from one of those fields, there's actually a lot of clues as to how you can, and tested and proven theories that have been replicated. And we need this, especially at our company, because we're small and we don't have as much data, to be able to understand what actually drives things like how do people infer culture, the real culture, not what people say and want our culture to be. And so that gives us clues. I mentioned, I so admire astronomers and astrophysicists where they're measuring things thousands of light years away. And so what kind of data do you use to figure out if there's planets or stars that far away? It's learning how to figure out, what are the different sources of signal. And so to answer your question more directly, for us so far, it has been the collection of survey data as well as the passive data coming from sources like Worklytics, whether it's G Suite, Jira, Zoom, whatever, as well as HRIS and just the recorded archives of what people experience. And just to put my cards on the table, I think I have a pure econ math stats background, and I had a little bit of the brainwashing of don't trust surveys because people are biased. Well, what I quickly learned is that, people are biased, but these indicators and measures that are objective and passive are actually also imperfect measures of people and what they're doing, because they're also just kind of like remnants of what folks are doing. So I look at as much as I can get my hands on, and I think about what the best technique would be to address the question. So there isn't like a favorite particular source, but as I think to the future, I'm really excited because if we think about, we are an in-person culture, we probably will be somewhat remote going forward. We just have to be open to, what are the needs of our labor market that we recruit from? What are their preferences and how can we flex to that so that we're making sure that we attract the highest caliber talent? And then if you look at these companies like Steelcase, they've been thinking about this from a long time ago, where they're attaching like heat sensors, not in a creepy way, but just to understand how do you optimize space, how do you make it more modular and to fit the evolving needs so that we're not paying massive amounts of money for rent to get space that we may or may not fully utilize. And so there's just so much more coming online. It's hard to pinpoint one favorite set, but trying to think of it more as, what are we trying to get after, and then working backwards from there.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that analogy that we're like astronomers thinking about what signal we can pick up to infer more about the stars. That's great. I'll definitely remember that one. So Alex, you guys at Dropbox have been quite public about moving to virtual first. I know one of the questions that we get a lot from other organizations that we talk to is, how do you decide about who comes into the office and when, versus who would benefit from being remote versus who would benefit from being face to face, and when is it best to do one or the either? How are you guys thinking about that at Dropbox, and are you using any data to make those types of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, we're using Worklytics data as well as Workday and employee engagement surveys. As Min hit it on the head earlier, there's just so much available to really dive into. And so one of the things that I think myself and Dropbox, really want to hit home is that Dropbox is not a hybrid model. We're virtual first. The key difference here is that the primary experience for all of our employees is virtual. Versus the hybrid model, an employee chooses whether or not they want to be virtual or come on site or some version of both. We have reservations on the hybrid model because potentially we have seen in research and studies that it could perpetuate this feeling of not being inclusive or inequalities amongst employees, and we find that very vital and important to address that. We still, however, I think Min also hit it on the point when we're trying to recreate this culture. Recreate what makes it special, right? And so we know that's still a piece of the puzzle, and we believe in the human and the in-person element work, and specifically as it pertains to teamwork. And we're investing in these collaboration spaces called Dropbox Studios. And these studios are designed to be collaborative spaces for team meetings and large groups, but not for like everyday solo work. So there is still that concept or that feeling of water cooler talk. You see someone, you hear someone in person, and you feel their energy. And I think that's really important. In terms of the data and how we're using that data, again, employee engagement surveys, what we're looking to do is we're doing stratified random sampling to better track over time in different groups and populations. So we're able to kind of see that this change in the way that we're doing surveys leads to, the individuals who are implementing this virtual first plan to get their hands on the data that's important for them. Because one of the things that also is important as we're rolling this virtual first model out is it's not one solution fits all. It's about learning, retooling, and then iterating on that process as we learn with anything to be really successful, to change along with how our culture is changing. And then one of the other things I think Min also mentioned was, the ability to collaborate. When you're virtual, sometimes you're on, sometimes you're not. So with Dropbox being a global company, one of the things that was really important to us was that we saw that research working together in short bursts, especially for virtual first teams or remote teams, is really effective. So to preserve this focus and this work-life balance, we've implemented this company strategy called the core collaboration hours. So depending on your time zone, you should be on, being able to work synchronously, communicate via email, Slack, and meetings. However, when you're outside of those collaborations, it's okay not to be on. It's okay to connect asynchronously. And that's what we're pushing to do, is that, reevaluate some of those meetings that you're having. Is it really necessary? Do you need to do this, or can it be an email? Can it be a Slack? Do you need to meet about a meeting in the future, about 5 meetings from now? Probably not. So, try to be really efficient about how we're scheduling our meetings and meeting with people and collaborating. And so one of the data sources in the data we're going to be using is the Worklytics data about that collaboration time, about incorporating collaboration hours. Are we seeing certain time zones are feeling left out? Are they not inclusive? So we make sure that we were monitoring that and iterating on that always.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that concept of core collaboration, allowing people the freedom to move between times where they're really expected to be on and collaborating and available to everyone, and times where they have a little bit more freedom to be offline. That's fascinating. How about you, Min, at VideoAmp? How are you thinking about what's next? What is the future beyond where we are now? Presumably the vaccines are going to come through towards the end of the year. Looking into next year, what are you starting to think about? Whether you go fully remote, hybrid, virtual first, somewhere in between, and how are you thinking about that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, what we've already told our employees is that, we're working from home until June, and depending on what happens then, we'll reevaluate. But whatever the case, as long as the pandemic is still there and not fully behind us, working in person will be optional because we want people to feel comfortable. Beyond that, it'll be so interesting. The work we're doing now is actually showing us that we were so reliant on that in-person culture to strengthen our environment and our climate. And so we're really building muscle to have that culture be transportable and strong in either case. And so, that might change our perception of the need to be in person or not all the time. We don't know. But right now, the belief is that, hey, there's really something special and unique about the way we show up for each other in person. And so it's hard to imagine ever going for a company like ours to go fully remote. But like I mentioned before, I think we are a data-driven company truly. And so we're going to a part of that means keeping our options and our minds open. And the thing that we want to look into is the external labor market. If we think about the core talent that we're after, especially as we think about our data scientists and our engineers, and we do have world-class data scientists and engineers among other amazing talent. What are their needs? And there's a lot of noise in the system right now, and I think the jury's still out. And so really getting, quantitative and qualitative data about what's going to be our best bet for the business objectives to help us succeed. That's the kind of thing that would be really important to us as we think about the decisions ahead.
Awesome. That's so fascinating, man. Thanks for that insight into how you're thinking about it. So I wanted to just end the session with one last open-ended question. Obviously, this has been a tumultuous period, a very difficult period for a lot of people over the past 12 months. But it's also been a period for a lot of learning, particularly within people analytics teams, within HR. So much has changed about the way we do work. Can you think of one or two key things that you've learned and taken away from this period, and what are you optimistic about when it comes to the future of work? Alex, do you want to give it a go? Any thoughts?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. What I think about is that for Dropbox, the 9-to-5 workday legacy is morphing. It's changing. We're going into this with a mindset that we're going to learn and we're going to iterate as we go forward, as I mentioned. To the point of doing research and some things outside and about how the pandemic and the work from home has affected our employees. We commissioned an industry survey with the Economics Intelligence Unit. We also collaborated with similar companies like Slack, Stripe, GitLab, and Atlassian on kind of what they're thinking about and showing them our toolkits and seeing what they're talking about and thinking about and their opinions on our own thoughts. But as similar to what Min mentioned, with us going virtual first, one of the great things is that we'll be operating in more geographical areas now. We can hire in more diverse talent pools. It allows for the diversity of our employees to be greater. And so the three things that we've kind of learned as we're going through this process and rolling out virtual first is, one, a culture transformation is required. And then how we go about that is really important to the core of our company values. Two, a hybrid model is very challenging, and we need to continue to iterate on how we approach our own model and think about other models and the best things that apply to those models. And three, in-person collaboration is extremely vital to the health of the company and to the health of the employee. So I'll close with two of these positive kind of examples of virtual first implementation that we've seen at Dropbox. Is one of our recent employee surveys. We saw, we asked the question, how productive are you working remotely? And the majority of employees answered extremely productive or very productive, with about 10% of the employee population saying they were not. Which kind of shows us, as we gradually roll these things out, it's important to continually get that feedback and monitor how our employee sentiment is, not only quantitatively, but qualitatively. And then the second thing I think that's really important or kind of cool to see is that as we've become more distributed workforce, we've seen numerous employees utilize relocation packages. They've made moves across the US. They've made global moves. And I'm going to give a shout out to one of our analysts, Samuel Ansbach, who found this cool little golden nugget. Was like, we have employees moving from Europe, London, and they're moving to Arizona in the US. And this wouldn't be possible without this virtual first model and allowing that flexibility in our employees' lives. So what I want to end with is that, one, we're learning that your life isn't tied to where you work anymore. And I see that the future of work allows for more individuality and more diversity in our employee pool. So that's super excited about that.
Awesome. That's great to hear, Alex. Min, how about you in the last couple of minutes? I think we're almost over time, but any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's for me, it's, a lot of what Alex mentioned, but I'll add two things. I learned not to underestimate the power of talking to people, face to face on Zoom. I think as people analytics professionals, it's easy to, in a way, hide behind the data and let the data do the talking. But I'll tell you, a lot of my best hypotheses and learnings come from, just talking to people. And again, it's that notion of data is actually a pretty low resolution of reality. And you can get so much texture and color from talking to individuals. And I think about my stats classes where you're kind of taught to like, hey, you have your data, look for the outliers, remove them. But I actually learned there's a lot of information and interesting things you can learn from the outliers too. And people are human beings, sometimes those big ideas can spread. And so it behooves us to get insight into what those opinions and perspectives are. The second is, that I now encourage in every single person. It's going to sound a little dramatic and serious, but we are in the age of misinformation. It's not good enough to just show data and say, I'm right, you better listen to me. Every time there's an opinion, I'm right, I have data, there's going to be another person with the opposing opinion with data on their side. So the thing I encourage is curiosity, healthy skepticism and critical thinking. You can't not replace those. And to me, what it means to be data-driven now is really to be open-minded, be open to being wrong, being open to what might not be, what might have been right, might change under a different circumstance.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Great to hear. Min, Alex, thank you so much for your time today. Really interesting conversation. And all the best. Looking forward to continuing the conversation on this.
Thank you so much.